Hello and welcome. I'm your host Elizibar. We are going to talk a little bit about the big manga versus comics debate, why manga's successful, that sort of stuff. There's a lot of opinions going on, a lot of opinions going around, people saying this and that. But if you've seen sales figures, and sales figures aren't so great anymore, Comic-Con doesn't have the most accurate numbers now that comic books are spread over several different distributors instead of everything going through Diamond. Things have changed. The world is different than it was just a couple years ago when I started getting back into comics and started talking about it here on YouTube. But most indications show stuff like One Piece, My Hero Academia. These manga way outsell mainstream Western comic books. Now, I'm going to back up just a second. Every now and then there's some book that sells like gangbuster units. Walking Dead #1 when it relaunched in the new improved version, I forget what they're calling it. That sold like gangbusters. I think they did like 300,000 units or something estimated. Big numbers. Every now and then you get a breakout hit. And you still have like top end books like Batman, like the big flagship Batman titles, sometimes Spider Man, moving like 100,000 units. Those kind of things still happen, but the vast majority of comic books are out there selling like 10,000 units. That ain't nothing. And when you take the whole size of the comic book pie and the whole size of the manga pie, I hate to tell you, but the manga pie is bigger than the comic book pie. That's just how it is. You can see this if you go into a store. Yeah, you know those physical things that exist? My local comic book store, and we'll talk about comic book stores more in a little bit, it has a manga section that is slowly eating up the independent publisher section of the store. So the place where things like Boom, Zenoscope, those kind of books where they live, it's being eaten up by manga. It started out as like one little unit, and now it's 2 units. Who knows where it's going to go? 6 months from now, it might be half of the wall. Won't affect me too much. I get my books, as part of like subscription type stuff, the pull list, which is a major problem in and of itself. There are so many problems here with comic books, but we're going to talk about distribution a little bit. Or I think availability is the word I would use. So, Tyler here, distribution is a no brainer. Manga is so readily available both digitally and in stores and sell in more places than where you can buy a 24-page comic floppy. Tyler, they're like 20 pages now, bro, unless you count the ads. The fact that manga's in Walmart and Batman isn't showcases, there's a problem. Okay? He's onto something here. So you might remember a couple of years ago, DC did this thing where they put these 80-page giants in Walmart. They were cheap. They were like $5 or $6. You got like 80 pages. That's a lot of book. That is a lot of book. For example, let's just flip over to my Elgato here. Like, see, this is about 80 pages. That's a fair chunk of book. This is probably 80 pages here in a graphic novel. This, 20 pages. That costs $5. Well, I think this actually costs $3.99. Those DC books were in that price point. They were like $5, and you got 80 pages of stuff. That's like 4 comic books. It was a good proposition. And the first bunch of those that they released, I got in on them on issue 3, and that stuff was all golden. I would have really liked to got in on them sooner, but here's the problem. No one can find them. I got 4 Walmarts within easy driving distance of me, maybe 5, but I only went to 4 of them. One of them never stocked them. One of them stocked them, but they were never actually there, except for really ratty looking issues. One of them sometimes had some, and the 4 sometimes had some that the other one didn't. Now, let's say you're trying to buy this stuff for your kid, right? Or your kid's looking for a specific thing. Are you really going to like drive your kid around to like 4 Walmarts? I just did this because I was like interested in this product, interested in seeing what it was going to be like. But DC never had a schedule for when these books would be in stores. They never had a schedule of what books were coming out in a given month. They had really bad product placement because the stuff wasn't in the book section. The stuff wasn't in the toys section. stuff was up front with the Pokemon cards. Why on earth would I go look in the card section up front for comic books? See, it used to be comic books were available literally everywhere. You went into a place that had a newsstand, they had comic books. They may not have every comic book, but they had some comic books. You could get an issue of Amazing Spider-Man pretty much anywhere. In a given shopping mall, there would be like 3 or 4 places that sold them. There would be a newsstand, a bookstore, maybe a second bookstore, and sometimes even like the toy store. That's how widely available comic books used to be. When comic books was a bigger, healthier industry. And I don't mean big strictly in terms of like the dollars, like absolute dollars, because dollars have devalued over the years thanks to inflation. So what used to be a good amount of money in terms of smaller dollar size would have more value than the same equivalent. Now, you know how inflation works. We're not going to get into economics. Economics is a whole nother video. But you used to be able to get comic books anywhere, and they were at a low price point. You know, you're at the store or whatever, and your kid's like, "Oh, Dad, Dad. Oh, Mom. Look, I want Spider-Man. It's 75 cents." 75 cents is like pocket change. That's 3 phone calls made from a payphone. That is nothing. Okay, I guess payphones were like a dime back then, but they became a quarter by the time I was like no longer a little kid. So anyway, I digress. You get the idea though. You had pocket change. No one cares about pocket change, and pocket change bought comic books. Comic books now cost a whole lot more. In the 80s, the big publishers were like, "Hey, we're gonna put stuff in specialty stores, the direct market." And that let littler publishers thrive. They could charge you $3 for a black and white 20-page comic, and people would buy it because it's like, "Oh, this is so cool. Look at that." You didn't have to go through the Comics Code Authority. You didn't have to deal with distributors who, well, newsstand distributors. There used to be like 10 of them. I don't think there's 10 anymore, but they were all evil and tried to squeeze every penny out of the market on both sides, out of the publishers and out of their stores they were selling to. That's just how business works. But now comic book companies had to rely on them less and less, and they could sell to the direct market, get higher profit margins. It was easier. It's a captive audience. You know, people that are going there are people that want your stuff. Like, by definition, if they're going to a comic book store, they're looking for comic books. The problem is, when you start relying on that as a crutch, you get into the situation where no one can find your books because they're not out in the wild. And anytime somebody tries to put them in the wild, they end up in weird places. I talked about the DC effort, but Allegiance Arts did a similar thing. They got into Walmart. They had a cool, the first box they had, the first like standee thing, display, that's the right word. It was like red. You couldn't miss it. Well, here's the problem. I went to Walmart's, 3 of them, looking for this. First Walmart didn't have them. Second Walmart, I never found where it was supposed to be. Third Walmart, which is not one I normally go to, I went in there looking for it. I eventually found it in the electronics section. It wasn't in the books, wasn't in the toys, wasn't up front with the DC stuff. It was in electronics. Why? Stuff like that means your product is not actually available. If potential customers who have some idea that your product even exists are looking for your product and can't find it, your product might as well not exist. You have no availability. You have no distribution. Your product is dead to those people. That's kind of how comic books is. They still sell a lot. Sometimes you get a big event, you get a #1 that's the right thing. Maybe even sometimes you get a tie-in to something else. But that's not sustainable. That's special. And if you keep trying to recreate special things one after another, it loses its impact. There's a lot to unpack here for why manga is being more successful right now than comic books. Distribution, availability, however you want to phrase it, is a big part of it. If you can't find something, then you can't buy something. It's that easy. And manga, you can find it. You can find it in a bookstore. You can find it in Walmart. You can find some manga in the periodical section. Like if you're looking for Shonen Jump or whatever, like that'll be in periodicals, which means that's actually in 7-Eleven. That's in the gas station, which is where you used to be able to find comic books. You used to be able to go to a gas station, there'd be a spinner rack, it would have comic books on. You'd be like, oh, Dad, buy me Spider-Man, buy me Batman, whatever. It's $1. It's cheap. Those days are over. They will probably never come back. And the Western comic format is suffering because of that. All right. Thank you for listening to me rambling. You all take care of yourselves. You have a great one. Bye-bye.